Hi friends, welcome to Reading Today. I'm so excited to tell you that we are starting a new book today called The Story of Ruby Bridges. And our focus question for this text is, how did Ruby Bridges make a difference in the world? Our objective is we will be able to describe how authors use reasons to support specific points. And I know what you're thinking, Miss Foster, what in the world does that mean and why are we learning this? Well, authors support their points using examples, facts, and details. And good readers describe how authors support their points to better understand important ideas in the text. So, let's talk about what some of these words mean that I keep on using, okay? Repeat after me. Key point. The main idea, an author shares about the topic. Great. Repeat after me. Reason, a cause or explanation for something. Good. Repeat after me. Support, to provide proof or evidence for. Very good. And we will discuss what this means a little bit later on, but I want to go ahead and start reading our text for today. So before I get started, I want to show you a timeline. Okay, so we just finished reading the book Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington. If you remember, the March on Washington happened in the year 1963. That was 57 years ago, okay? And 1 year later, in 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. And remember, that made discrimination based on the color of your skin illegal. But I want to share with you some of what happened in the years before the March on Washington occurred, okay? So in the year 1954, there was a law passed called Brown versus Board of Education. And it made racial segregation illegal, okay? And if you remember, segregation is the practice of separating people according to the color of their skin. So in 1954, the government said we can no longer segregate based on the color of skin in schools, okay? Remember, the government is the group of people that has the power to make laws or rules that people follow. And sadly, boys and girls, even though it was illegal to separate schools based on skin color, a lot of schools in states in the South, which is the area on the map that's around here, okay, the schools in these states did not integrate or place children with different skin colors in the same schools until closer to about 5 or 6 years after the law was passed, okay? And even then, a lot of schools still thought it was okay to separate students based on their skin color, okay? So in 1960, Ruby Bridges, she goes to an all-black school. And in 1961, she moves to a all-white school. And we will learn more about that in the story, but I just wanted to go ahead and give you an idea of the timeline that all of these events occurred and how they are connected. So let's get started. The Story of Ruby Bridges by Robert Coles, illustrated by George Ford. Ruby Bridges was born in a small cabin near Tylertown, Mississippi. We were very poor, very, very poor, Ruby said. My daddy worked picking crops. We just barely got by. There were times when we didn't have much to eat. The people who owned the land were bringing in machines to pick the crops, so my daddy lost his job, and that's when we had to move. I remember us leaving. I was 4, I think. Boys and girls, Mississippi, which if you remember is where Miss Foster went to college, is this state here. And this is Texas. This is where San Antonio is. So Ruby Bridges was born in Tylertown, Mississippi, which is right here on the map. In 1957, the family moved to New Orleans. Ruby's father became a janitor. Her mother took care of the children during the day. After they were tucked in bed, Ruby's mother went to work scrubbing floors in a bank. Every Sunday, the family went to church. We wanted our children to be near God's Spirit. Ruby's mother said, we wanted them to start feeling close to Him from the very start. Boys and girls, New Orleans is a city in the state of Louisiana, which borders Texas, and is located right here. So she moved from Tylertown, Mississippi to New Orleans. And friends, segregation was at its worst here in the South in these states. Just keep that in mind. At that time, black children and white children went to separate schools in New Orleans. The black children were not able to receive the same education as the white children. It wasn't fair, and it was against the nation's law. In 1960, a judge ordered 4 black girls to go to 2 white elementary schools. 3 of the 4 girls were sent to McDough 19. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was sent to 1st grade in William Frantz Elementary School. I see Ruby. I see the judge. Wow, I can't wait to see what happens next. Ruby's parents were proud that their daughter had been chosen to take part in an important event in American history. They went to church. We sat there and prayed to God, Ruby's mother said, that we'd all be strong and we'd have courage and we'd get through any trouble. And Ruby would be a good girl and she'd hold her head up high and be a credit to her own people and a credit to all the American people. We prayed long and hard. Wow, I can tell that Ruby and her family think that this is a very important part of history that she's getting to be a part of. On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside of the Frantz Elementary School. The people carried signs that said they didn't want black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. The city and the state police did not help Ruby. Wow, really? The President of the United States ordered federal marshals to walk with Ruby into the school building. The marshals carried guns. Okay, so friends, this is a marshal, and I'm going to assume that he is a marshal as well. Okay, here's the definition of marshal. In the United States, a marshal is an officer whose duties are like a police officer for the government. So, it says that the city and state police officers didn't help Ruby. They didn't want her to get to go to this new school for white people. So, the President of the United States had to send his own officers to take Ruby into the building. And I want you to notice all of the pictures here. These people, these white people, do not look happy that she is there to go to school today. Every day, for weeks that turned into months, Ruby experienced this kind of school day. She walked to the Frantz school surrounded by marshals, wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair and carrying her lunch pail. Ruby walked slowly for the first few blocks. As Ruby approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the street. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed toward her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. Look at how Ruby is keeping her eyes forward. She's walking straight into that school. It doesn't seem like she's really paying any attention to those angry people around her. The white people in the neighborhood would not send their children to school. When Ruby got inside the building, she was all alone, except for her teacher, Mrs. Henry. There was no other children to keep Ruby company, to play with and learn with, to eat lunch with. But every day, Ruby went into the classroom with a big smile on her face, ready to get down to the business of learning. She was polite and worked well at her desk, Mrs. Henry said. She enjoyed her time there. She didn't seem nervous or anxious or irritable or scared. She seemed as normal and relaxed as any child I've ever taught. So Ruby began learning how to read and write in an empty classroom, an empty building. Wow, can you imagine going to a school and being there all by yourself? How would that feel? Sometimes I'd look at her and wonder how she did it, said Mrs. Henry. How she went by those mobs, which is a group of angry people, and sat here all by herself and yet seemed so relaxed and comfortable. Mrs. Henry would question Ruby in order to find out if the girl was really nervous and afraid, even though she seemed so calm and confident. But Ruby kept saying she was doing fine. The teacher decided to wait and see if Ruby would keep on being so relaxed and hopeful, or if she'd gradually begin to wear down, or even decide that she no longer wanted to go to school. Wow, and Ruby looks so happy. She must be so brave and strong. Then, one morning, something happened. Mrs. Henry stood by a window in her classroom, as she usually did, watching Ruby walk toward the school. Suddenly, Ruby stopped right in front of the mob of howling and screaming people. She stood there facing all those men and women. She seemed to be talking to them. I wonder what she's going to say. Mrs. Henry saw Ruby's lips moving and wondered what Ruby could be saying. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. The marshals were frightened. They tried to persuade Ruby to move along. They tried to hurry her into the school, but Ruby wouldn't budge. Then Ruby stopped talking and walked into the school. When she went into the classroom, Mrs. Henry asked her what happened. Mrs. Henry told Ruby that she'd been watching and that she was surprised when Ruby stopped and talked with the people in the mob. Ruby became irritated. I didn't stop and talk with them, she said. Ruby, I saw you talking, Mrs. Henry said. I saw your lips moving. I wasn't talking, said Ruby. Ruby, I saw you talking. I was praying, said Ruby. I was praying for them. Every morning Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. This morning she forgot until she was already in the middle of the angry mob. Wow, I can't believe that. Ruby was praying for those who hated her. When school was over for the day, Ruby hurried through the mob as usual. After she walked a few blocks and the crowd was behind her, Ruby said the prayers she repeated twice a day, before and after school. Please, God, try to forgive those people, because even if they say those bad things, they don't know what they're doing. So you could forgive them, just like you did those folks a long time ago, when they said terrible things about you. Afterward. Later that year, two white boys joined Ruby at the Franz Elementary School. Their parents were tired of seeing the boys get into mischief around the house when they could have been in school and learning. The mob became very angry when the first white students went back to school, but those boys were soon joined by other children. We've been sitting back and letting our children get cheated out of an education because some people have tried to take the law into their own hands, one parent said. It's time for us to fight for the side of the law and for our children's right to go to a school and get their education. They all did get their education, Ruby and a growing number of boys and girls who went to school with her. By the time Ruby was in second grade, the mobs had given up their struggle to scare Ruby and defeat the federal judge's order that New Orleans schools should be desegregated so that children of all races might be in the same classroom. Year after year, Ruby went to the Franz School. She graduated from it, then went on to graduate from high school. Ruby Bridges is married to a building contractor and has 4 sons. Now a successful businesswoman, she has created the Ruby Bridges Educational Foundation. All right, friends, so that is our story. Go ahead and continue to watch the next video. so that we can wrap up our lesson today.